Hey everyone, Ryan here at Plague Scythe Studios, and today I am taking my newest pawn shop rescue for a spin, and that is the Ibanez RG350DX. Much like my Electra SG clone and the Jackson R3 that came before it, the story of this guitar began in a very similar manner where I walked into a store that I had no business being in and spotted a fairly roughed up, extremely dirty electric guitar that I just couldn't stand to see sit there much longer. And it's like one of those sad, abused pet commercials you'll see on TV, try to sucker you into donating money. That's how I am with guitars a lot of the times. But I pulled the trigger on this ultimately because it was extremely cheap. I got a very good deal on it, even based on the used prices of this thing. But I wanted to go over this guitar for a few reasons, some of which are personal, but most importantly for the channel's sake is that I made an episode of Explained recently talking about value guitar gear and how I would balance my rig for the greatest value, depending on what you're going after, if you're a bedroom player, if you're gigging, if you're recording, and I kind of went over different price tiers. But one of my biggest pieces of advice was if you're comfortable with it, always buy used if you can find what you're looking for. And a good piece of wisdom for guitars, especially, is if you're on a strict budget, say you can't spend more than $200, $250 on a guitar, you're better off almost always hunting around pawn shops, whatever thrift stores may be nearby, or Craigslist, eBay, and finding a decent tier guitar, maybe $350, $400 range that is used, which will automatically knock that down, and you'll get a better deal. And then you can always upgrade pickups and do, take it to a guitar tech, have them do a little bit of work on it, and you'll be way ahead and you'll have a good value instrument. And I think this fits the definition perfectly. So we're going to put it to the test and see if that's the case. Personally speaking, this is another kind of one of those cases, as with the Line 6 Pod, where I denied myself the ability to own one of these because everyone had an Ibanez RG. This isn't an uncommon thing, I'm sure, but this guitar, specifically the 350DX, was kind of popular around 2005 to 2010. I'm actually not sure what year this model is. I'd have to look up the serial number, but this Indonesian-made bolt-on kind of value-oriented super strat was absolutely everywhere. And in fact, one of the guys I jammed with and took a few lessons from played on I think it was a 1990 550 LTD, is that beautiful purple mirror finish. And I really liked the way that guitar played, loved the way it sounded, but I could not look at myself in the mirror and say, that's the kind of guitar I want. I want to play a super strat. Which is why up until I started playing 8 strings, I bought pretty much any guitar that wasn't shaped that way, whether it be a single cut, some variation of a V, SG, whatever, because it's just, I wanted to avoid that kind of stereotype. So here I am allowing myself to, I guess, revisit some nostalgia that I never allowed myself to have. So let's go over this thing real quick. If you've played or own any sort of Ibanez RG before in the past, then you'll know what this is. It's pretty much the baseline version of an RG, but there are some interesting modifications, some battle scars on here. So aside from some light cosmetic damage, it was banged up there. It was, there's a little bit of a crack here, but it's mostly surface level. It's not affecting the integrity of the bolt. Maybe a couple chips here, your normal bangs and dings and things you would see in a 10-year-old guitar. But the volume knob was drilled and moved over closer to the tone knob, which is fine for me because this is a metal-centric instrument, so I'm not doing a whole lot of volume roll-offs. But there would be some play cases where I would like to have that there, where I kind of move it with my pinky as normal, but looked like they just covered it up with black electrical tape, so that's kind of fun. Another weird thing was the tremolo bar was broke off in this when I got it, and I noticed that pretty much immediately when I picked it up. Because this is an Edge 3 bridge, it didn't have that little screw on top that you'll find on a lot of Floyd Rose guitars that allow it to free spin. And whatever plastic washers used to be on the trim arm were completely gone. It was just shoved in there, so I had to take off the bridge, take off about every nut and bolt on it, and slam it with a screwdriver and nail until it came out. So no tremolo action on this demo, but I'm not a big trim player anyway. I'm pretty much using this as a glorified fine-tuning locking bridge. As I would do for about any spring-based tremolo system, I also have some silencing material back here. So it's a combination of foam and cloth and tape around the bridge just to keep it from ringing, and especially when you're doing like palm muted stops like that, it can have some negative reverberations that you don't want and sound like crap. So for my cases, since I'm not even using the tremolo, that is fine. And even if you are, I've got it, you know, lightly packed enough to where that wouldn't be an issue. Other than that, I just basically gave it a deep clean. Whoever previously owned this thing had to have been a smoker by the discoloration and some of what looked like ashes on it, which was great. And then probably a pet owner as well. So this thing was fairly filthy, but overall it's in pretty good shape now. Also had to set up the action to my liking, because one of the things I just do not meld well with Ibanez's over is their stock setup. It is just, I cannot stand that low action. It feels like a toy to me. And I'm a very hard hitting when it comes to both picking and my finger action, and it's just not compatible. You know, obviously people who are super fast shredders, it makes sense why they would want that, but I want to fight the strings a little bit. I want to feel that feedback, which is why most of the time I prefer like a Tune-o-matic bridge in an angled neck like you would find on, you know, Gibson guitars. So did have to spend some time there, but other than that, it's pretty much the stock deal. So from top to bottom, you have the iconic set of inline tuners, which are somewhat insensitive. They're a fairly low ratio, which isn't a huge deal to me considering that you can, you know, do fine tuning back here. But if you do plan on not using the Floyd Rose style locking nut there, if you're doing a lot of down tuning or changing your tunings between songs, then that may, you know, take some time to get used to. And this may be a good area to, you know, focus and upgrade on later in the future if you do go like this sort of budget route. But I think they get by with this considering the bridge down here. I'm pretty sure they considered this the Wizard 2 neck. I think this is a 3-piece unless you count the 5th, you know, pieces here on the headstock. But it's that flat Ibanez super thin neck. You'll either love it or hate it. It's quite a bit different compared to even like the Jackson bolt-on I own. Comparing it to my other guitars, it's actually closest to my NOF Super Typhoon because we based that neck on an Ibanez profile. I just wanted it thicker. And it's very similar radius on the edges and still has that flat thing going on in the center. So I can kind of position my thumb in a similar way, although my palm isn't really making contact with the back of the neck much. It allows you to be super quick though. Obviously, that's something that a lot of players like. The fretboard is a magnificent example of rosewood. I love the grain structure on this thing. It was so dry. It took up like 3 full ounces of lemon oil, but after that, it really popped. And it's a shame that, you know, you're not gonna be able to buy new guitars with that as far as, you know, exports and that kind of stuff goes. And the shark inlays, like these are super sharp. I was looking for, you know, any sign of mishaps or maybe there was a, you know, kind of a bad cut. And no, they're pretty much perfect. So especially for the time, and especially given the budget, but the binding, the fret dressing, the joint, everything is really commendable for the full price they were charging for at the time, especially for what I paid for it. That brings us to the body, which is the iconic Ibanez Gem/RG Super Strat shape, belly cut. You know what you're looking at. It's fine. It's one of the best in terms of usability and you know, both standing and sitting, and it's no wonder it's the most popular body shape ever. But like I said, a million videos, I'm just tired of seeing them. For the hardware, we have the somewhat controversial, some people love them, some people hate them, Infinity 3 on the neck, the Infinity 4 on the bridge, and the Infinity 3 single coil in the center. These are, without a doubt, at least in my opinion, the weakest parts of this guitar. They are very serviceable, and again, for the price and for what they are, they're fine. But I would leave it at that. If you're playing through, a solid state amp, budget gear, kind of starting out, or kind of a value-oriented digital modeler, this isn't going to be your bottleneck, and I totally understand why they wouldn't go much further for equipping this kind of tier of guitar. But when you put them through higher quality stuff, they are a tad muddy. I do really like the way they're EQ'd though. This is one of those guitars that it can stand playing through most high gain amps, a 5150 for instance, or some types of hot rodded Marshalls without needing an overdrive or boost whatsoever. It really does cut. It has that chunk. It's got the definition. It does the John Petrucci thing. It does the Gojira thing when putting it through those kind of amplifiers, whereas a lot of passives you still need either a level boost or especially some EQ tweaking to stay articulate. There's the typical 5-way blade switch that you would find on these HSH configurations, where you've got bridge, neck, center, and then these two coils and these two coils. And especially those center three are really nice for cleans, to the point that if you put them through something like an acoustic sim on a multi-effects unit, they sound great and it would be an okay substitute, I think, in a lot of situations. But this is one of those guitars, one of those pickup configurations where I want to play super high gain on the bridge for rhythm. I want to do the Petrucci lead thing on the neck pickup, or I want to do super cleans. That's it. This is not a guitar whose tones inspire me to play edge of breakup or even a lot of crunch stuff. I want to leave that to Gibson style guitars. Not to say that it can't handle it, but there's something about the action, there's something about the way that the pickups are voiced and the way they react that I just don't want to play that. I want to, kind of go towards those opposite ends of the spectrum. Of course, all of that's wired in on a pick guard, making those changes fairly simple compared to those that would be mounted directly to the body. And then, of course, the Edge 3 Tremolo, which operates very similarly to a lot of Floyd Rose type stuff, and I like it a lot. The fine-tuning screws have about the same pitch you would expect compared to a Kahler or Floyd Rose equivalent. One of the downsides is to change the intonation. You have to have the strings super loose, which kind of sucks. These bridge post height adjustments are more or less completely stripped, so you got to have the strings off to be able to do that, but I was able to get that fairly easily. The biggest gripe I have with this is these are pretty much worn out as well. The string tensioners, bite down things, whatever you want to call that. The clamp that holds the strings to the bridge, the name escapes me right now, but I didn't have any problems with any of them until the low E string, and maybe it's because of the gauge I'm using, but that was a nightmare to get to stick, so these are probably just worn out and need replacing. But otherwise, really good experience with the bridge so far. And I'd never noticed because none of my other guitars have it, but I like what they do back here with the springs. They actually have a plate cover to where no matter how far you whammy dive or go the other way, there's no way the springs can pop out. So overall, a really good system that compared to what other manufacturers were doing at the time for that budget, I think they really went above and beyond, and shows you just how many of these they were pumping out the door in massive volumes to be able to afford this kind of stuff. I mean, a lot of hardware on here for the $400-ish price range. So let's get into some tones. For the sake of ease and repeatability, everything you're hearing will be coming from the Fractal Audio AX8. I actually need to be able to recall these exact same presets for an upcoming content piece with this guitar, or else I would do it through the analog gear, because I've had some really good success and enjoyed playing straight through the amps on pretty much everything you see. But if your amp modeler or your actual amplifier or competing piece of gear does a similar sound to what you're hearing, like the 5150 or the boosted rectifier sound, then you can expect this guitar to kind of handle it the same way. So let's get underway. Well, would you look at that? The Super Strat with high output pickups does heavy metal really well. Crazy how that works. But it does everything else pretty admirably too. And if you're looking into this sort of budget tier, you know, kind of wallet friendly price guitar, especially in the used market, then this is a damn good one. This is in some ways an inferior product, I think, to some of the improvements they brought with the 450DX. A lot of people like the Quantum, I believe, pickups better than the Infinities. But for the money, you know, if you can get this thing $200 or under, you've got a really good platform, especially if you want to take advantage of, you know, like the Tremolo and have some extra tonal options. Because otherwise, with a lot of competing guitars, especially from like LTD or Schecter, you're only going to get, you know, humbucker here, and combined in the middle, whereas you have 5 tones here. And it gives you, you know, kind of a platform if you want to do coil splits and other stuff that isn't necessarily stock, you could potentially do that. I would still assert that the pickups are the weakest part of this package as a whole. The higher frequencies kind of have this almost low resolution granular texture to it, if it makes sense. And overall, the pickup quality is like out of breath a lot of the times. They're really straining to get the sound, whereas with a quality set of passives or even like budget active pickups, it's like in your face at all times without being compressed to the extent that you might hear out of some budget active pickups. But they're okay, you know, they're fine. I'd give them a solid 6 out of 10 for what they are, and especially for the money. I'm not complaining, but I think a pickup upgrade would do this thing very well. So we'll have to see about that in the near future. Overall, though, I still think this is further evidence that it's a great way to go for a budget-conscious guitar player, especially if you're just starting out. Of course, these kind of situations can be paradoxical because if you don't have a friend or a trusted resource to rely on, or what kind of guitars should I be interested in if I'm playing this style, or have this budget, what gear can I look at, then none of this information matters anyway. But hopefully between content like this and other stuff that's out there, you'll be able to weed through the noise and find out what is right for you. Either way, I think this is a really strong example of how much value you can get for not a whole lot of cash, how much growing room you have. I think this is one of those examples of something you can throw a bit more cash at and get something that will last you forever if you want it to. It doesn't have all the, you know, sweet features. It doesn't have quite the build quality you'll find on higher priced Ibanez's or higher priced guitars in general, but I mean, it does the job and it can keep up with higher end gear. You know, I don't feel stupid putting this through a Mesa Mark IV even right now. and if you make a few more tweaks, especially not then. The difficulties come when we start talking about budget-oriented 7-string guitars, or especially 8 strings, and the situation for 9s are so dire, they're almost an afterthought. But on that aforementioned value video, a lot of commenters were asking, and on videos in general, you know, I would like to get into 7-string guitars. I'm not sure if it's for me yet. I've got like $400, $500 to spend. What should I get? And I have so much trouble answering that question because there's really not an instrument that I can point at and say, yeah, that's good. Every model in that price tier seems to have such a drawback when it comes to construction quality or pickups or features or aesthetics that I really have a hard time saying you should buy that new, which I don't when it comes to a lot of the 6-string stuff, especially when we're talking about Ibanez. So I'll pose this question. Why the hell, Ibanez, do you not have a 7-string version of this in your budget line? Is it to sell more universes? Because that's what I want, really, without breaking the bank. If they made a 7-string RG350DX, whatever they want to call it, and it's this with, you know, budget-oriented, high-volume, low-cost pickups, that'd be fine. But I don't really understand why they're so obsessed with just the humbucker straight-to-body when they can obviously do that for 7 strings. It cannot be that much more significantly expensive. It will be at first, but I mean, people will want that, will they not? The Universe guitars are extremely sought after. They're this with one more string. So what's the hang up? Why do all of these budget 7 strings look like crap for the most part? In my opinion, you know, a lot of people might be okay with them, but you know, the straight black, especially with the EMGs, dot inlays, just like yuck. So here's my free piece of advice to Ibanez and whatever other manufacturer this might apply to. Obviously, people love these guitars. I've really taken a liking to it. And people want a high-value, low-budget 7-string or even 8-string. Between that and my gear acquisition syndrome flaring up for a 1990s green dot universe after playing this thing, why don't we have a budget-oriented version of that? Why don't we have this with one more string that costs like $500, $550? That would sell. I know it would. People want those guitars. There's an overseas clone market for that specifically, where you can buy all these off-brand versions that are probably crap. And I know there's even some that are stateside that make clones of that era of 7-string Ibanez's. I don't know if it's a licensing issue, but why they couldn't just add one more string to this thing without breaking the bank over time is beyond me. When it comes to 7 and 8 strings, their focus is seemingly hell-bent on these characterless, bland, straight-up ugly guitars, I think, in a lot of instances, for those that don't want to completely break the bank. And it shouldn't be like that. There are so many other companies that are providing that, and I'd like to see that you know, kind of pick up in the budget market. They're doing a much better job in that $900 to $1,500 range. So I hope they continue that progress down there. So my plans for this in the future, I thought about buying it, cleaning it up, doing a couple upgrades, and then flipping it for not much profit. Mainly just be able to do some videos on the channel for it. But damn, man, this thing's grown on me. I actually really like it. It doesn't fit me, you know, like the whole white thing. I've never thought I looked okay playing a white guitar, but I think I am going to hang on to it, at least for a little longer for sure, because we'll have one upcoming content piece, and someone asked for these, so we'll be chucking this set in here and seeing how they compare. And if I like them enough, then I'll definitely hang on to it. Might do a repaint. Obviously, it does need some body work anyway, and who knows, maybe it'll become one of my new daily drivers for doing demos and that kind of thing. But I like this kind of stuff. You know, the custom shop, you know, all the bells and whistles kind of designed from the ground up guitar is awesome. I wouldn't trade anything for it, but at my core, this is really what gets me excited, is finding something that you don't pay a whole lot for and you can get a whole lot out of. That's what it's all about when it comes to gear, in my opinion. But that'll do it for now. Any questions, comments, as always, please leave them down below. Please stay tuned for the upcoming Dragonfire video. We'll definitely be tackling that, and we will see you next time. Bye.